We live in a digital age of screens, from the humble cell phone to laptops, PCs, and the huge displays we see in the big cities of the 21st century. We seldom need to write manually. Keyboards and touchscreens relay the information literally at our fingertips. Emails arrive as soon as they are sent, along with texts on various social media platforms, images of all kinds. This is our world. We take a lot for granted. As in my life alone, the world was vastly different growing up. Yes, we still had digital elements, but the old Commodore 64s and the Spectrums were a far cry to the world we're accustomed to with today. Even printers were basic. I mean, who remembers the old dot matrix? God, they were fun and games. Back then, most things were done by hand, with pens and pencils, paper. Children would be required to write all the way through to adulthood. A valuable skill, but one I was never great at. And it often looked like I had picked up a spider, dipped it in ink, and let it loose on the page. But still, going back as far as I can remember, all you needed was a paper and pen, and you could have hours of fun bringing characters to life via art. If we made a mistake with a pencil, you'd simply rub it out. Or have a dark smudge on the paper. It depends how you kept your pencil case. Or you had the dreaded ink rubber. Yep, dark smudge, very much guaranteed. In fact, if you didn't get a dark smudge, you could take it back and complain. I digress. My point is, we take so much for granted. Entire populations can write, read. Outside the digital world, paper is dirt cheap, as are writing utensils. Oh bugger, can someone invent the rubber? I'm talking mainly about the Middle Ages, but it doesn't really matter what period you are dealing with, whether ancient Egyptian papyrus or medieval vellum. I mean, how could you relay messages, copy and store information? What about images? This is a period where you couldn't readily buy paper. In fact, in Europe, we won't really have paper until around the 12th century. But it wasn't paper that you'd be familiar with, and we won't really see the classic white paper during the Middle Ages. So unless you're in the Islamic world or near the mythical realms of the Asian Far East, forget about using paper. And you also won't be popping down the shops to buy pens and pencils or ink refills. No, you'd be using a quill. And the ink would be made by hand using various methods. As for the good old rubber, nope. But don't think that you're buggered if you make a mistake. Not the case. There was a way around that too. People have been writing for many thousands of years. Since at least the mid-4th millennium BC, where the ancient Sumerians etched their cuneiform script into clay tablets. Okay, sure, before that you had cave art that stretches back tens of thousands of years. But as important as that is, this video is specifically about writing. Relaying a language in a form of symbols, rather than some hunter-gatherer chap relaying to us that all deer were hunted in the region, and how big their dons were. The tribe, that is, not just the deer. And this art also tells us that the second mankind invents the ability to create art, we immediately draw a load of willies. nothing changes. Though, there are examples that do require more looking into. There are certainly some symbols that could possibly be an early form of writing. You never know. And some of these may not even be done by human hands, rather the Neanderthals, who were nowhere near as backwards as people previously thought. In fact, they were far from backwards, their development rivaling us in many areas. As for humans, there were certainly some attempts to develop glyphs to represent things going back to at least the 7th millennium, including things like tally sticks. But we don't really see writing as we know it, not until around the 3,500 years mark BC, in Mesopotamia, Samaria, of the cuneiform clay tablets I mentioned previously. Well, technically proto-cuneiform, but it becomes the cuneiform we know. And also, we see writing evolving separately in ancient Egypt, like Abydos, during the same period, the 3rd millennium BC. The pre-dynastic Egyptians were making bone labels for jars covered in various glyphs. We also see other forms of visual communication. So right now, we're certainly seeing writing appearing in some form or other. Though these are early days yet, but we're already getting a picture of how things were right back in the early concepts of writing. And a quick note on a proto-cuneiform. This is where we find the first recorded name in history, Cushim. He was an ancient Sumerian. Cushim himself is unknown, and we don't really know whether it was a personal name, a title or whatnot. All that is known is that Cushim traded in barley. So there you go. At this point, we're still very much in the era of baking bricks of clay and carving out the glyphs, or carving bone and the like, but we're about to see a few developments. As we enter the Bronze Age, we are seeing those Sumerian cuneiform tablets used more frequently, evolving into more complex structures. Records being kept in an increasing number, and you'd etch the glyphs into the clay tablet with a stylus made out of reed or wood. A very effective way of writing that lasted for millennia, thousands of years. Here we find the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest flood myths, and tales of mythical beasts and ancient winged gods. Tales that until now would have been only an oral tradition. Now they're in writing. But we're about to move on to a more evolved style rather than baking clay tablets. Thus we arrive again at ancient Egypt and the process of creating a more familiar material to write on, papyrus, and using various inks and paints. The material itself was made from a plant, the Sapirius papyrus, which was then prepared by laying stems in strips, watering, then gluing, then drying. As with any kind of paper-like material, there were varying degrees of quality. Your ink would be made primarily from charcoal, with pigments from various plants, but I'll get to the inks in a bit. So far we're just working out where we are in the progress of things, leading up to other periods we're more familiar with. Parchment is also around, which is dried and stretched animal skin, similar to vellum. So we're developing a good range of things to preserve records on, as well as implements to write with. Records that came in all kinds of forms, from taxes, trade to religious texts. By the 2nd millennium BC, things are in full swing during the ancient world. We've got the classic hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt, whether on papyrus, stone or bone, and these glyphs can be found everywhere in the region. When people mention ancient Egypt, this would be one of the first things that comes to mind. I'll also mention China, because the Chinese developed writing around the 12th century, during the Shang dynasty. They were writing symbols on things like shells and other materials, in what was called the oracle bone script, or at least that's what we call them. You've also got some Semitic writing appearing, scripts like Abjad and Hebrew, which is also a male teabag. No, it's not really. As far as civilization was concerned, pretty much everyone in this region of the world was at it, and it was sweeping across the globe. Unfortunately, a lot was lost during the Bronze Age collapse, but things eventually sort themselves out. Eventually. Thankfully, I'm concentrating on method, not content. So, as tragic as it is that much information was lost, the formula remains the same, pretty much. And it might be a good idea to pause and explore exactly who is doing all of this writing, as it is still very much a coveted skill set, and your average Jill isn't going to be scribbling down a shopping list on papyrus before popping down to the market square. Well, actually saying that, a cuneiform tablet dating to around 15th century BC does in fact contain a shopping list. And is it me, or does Gilgamesh look like he's just answered the door to the pizza delivery guy and is trying to prevent his cat from doing a legger? Anyway, the tablet. The first example of a shopping list. Though it's more a list of furniture for administrative purposes, rather than a loaf of bread, 6 eggs and some bog roll. Another thing that won't be around for a while.
I'm the great Conholio, need teepee for my bumhole.
No toilet roll, I'm afraid. We're relying on the good old bum scrubber. Conholio would be gutted.
Give me teepee.
Like any skill, you'd have to be trained to write, and the materials were pretty expensive. You couldn't just pick up any old reed and scribble on a rock. You needed to be able to create inks. Sure, chalk is around, but it has no permanency. One downpour of rain, and there goes your shopping list, and your bum scrubber with it. Besides, without training, you're illiterate anyway, so who cares? You would need to go to school where you got taught these things, and it would be a job with good prospects, as it would be the wealthy who tended to need things written down in the first place. As time goes on, more and more people are writing, especially in the priest classes, as much of the writing would be religious texts. So what would you need? Well, for a start, you need ink. And to get a nice black, you'd mix some charcoal in water to get like a treacle-like substance. A simple but effective method. And each scribe would have their own styles, variants and colorations. To get other colours would require mixing something other than charcoals. Or oils. I mean, trees form a protective gall in defence against destructive wasp eggs, and these galls contain acids. These acids can be used to create inks, and can be combined with iron salts. Egyptians used to use lead in their mix. So now you've got some nice browns, and can be combined with a whole host of other plants, ochres to create more vibrant colours. This is an art in itself. As I said, this is skilled work. And you would need to create an implement to put that ink to papyrus or parchment or whatnot, depending where you are. You're not just picking up a random twig. Writing had finesse. You needed a good tip to write, so let's gather some reeds. Once prepared, it is now resembling something not too dissimilar than what we're used to today. And you would hold it pretty much the same way. You'll need papyrus, or parchment, depending where you are, and parchment, as I said before, is an animal skin that is dried out and then stretched, then cut, until it looks like the product we're familiar with. There's also vellum, which is pretty much parchment, but made specifically from calf skin. Same method and everything. Once you've got your parchment, vellum or papyrus, you are pretty much ready to go. Robert's your dad's brother. And if you made a mistake, you're not buggered. You can wait until it dries, then use a small knife to slightly scrape the error off. You can also use a pumice stone to wear off the offending error. Once you're finished, this would be then rolled into a scroll, bound and stored. You also have the art of carving writing into stone, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. Very highly skilled work that involves masonry. Oh bloody hell, you can't take the Romans anywhere. Now, without going through each and every scribe who ever picked up a stylus and put ink to parchment or carved symbols into stone, I can safely assume that we've got the gist of how things progressed. And from the Iron Age until around the late medieval, things are not changing that much, as the same methods used by the ancient Egyptians and like-minded people are being used by the ancient Greeks and the Etruscans. What changes is language. We see the emergence of Latin script, as well as Arabic, and a whole host of others. But rather than divert to languages, I'll return my focus to the art of writing itself. Before I do, I'll mention that originally this video was intended to be focused on medieval writing. Hence, it's on the Medieval Society playlist. Yet, I found myself following the White Rabbit down that hole and went along for the ride. After all, it's an interesting subject and an added context of how we got to where we are in the Middle Ages. Especially now as the Latin script created by the Etruscans gets adopted and evolved by the Romans, and they'll emerge as a superpower during the Iron Age. And as far as writing is concerned, there are now other methods outside of parchment, stone and papyrus, because you see the emergence of the deltos among the Greeks, the wax tablets. Homer, no, not that Homer. Homer even mentions them in the Iliad. And it's not just the Greeks, but in Mesopotamia, and you're seeing Semitic script etched onto them as well. This is the new cool tool. The Romans especially like wax tablets. The tabula rasa. It's a simple and effective process. It's pretty much just wax melted over wood, and easy to etch your script onto using a stylus. Anyone who can write can use it, and now you can write your shopping list without blowing too much denarii. Now there's no forgetting that bum scrubber.
Hooray!
And if you need to reuse it, you simply heated the wax and smoothed it. Easy. Hence, tabula rasa, the Roman name for the tablets, means blank slate. It also leads to the term clean slate, because many of our sayings go back millennia, but it has no connection with wipe the slate clean, which is Victorian and refers to the blackboards where you would rub off the chalk. I mean, even the word salary comes from the Romans. Sale, their word for salt. Also, the reed stylus of the Bronze Age and beyond, they're being steadily replaced by quills. The new stylus, made of the flight feather from a bird, often a goose. Ignore the movies where people wrote with massive feathers with big plumages. They're very unwieldy. You'll need to prepare the stem, as you want a precision instrument. Using a knife to prepare your stylus, you'd strip some, if not all, of the feathers off, cutting the nib. It's now resembling something not too dissimilar than what we see today. It's looking very close. Remarkably like a modern fountain pen, and is used much like one. And this is how you get that classic script that marks this new age, that flat tip, as you can only draw the quill across the vellum, or parchment, at certain angles. Even my own writing looks less like a drunken spider fell in the ink pot and legged it over the page. It at least somewhat is recognisable as letters. And in later periods, you'd even come across metal nibs. The Romans are also using wooden tablets, scribbled on with the quill and ink. And these are no luxury item, as they are found all across the Republic and later the Empire. Anyone can get their hands on them, as many have been found in Roman forts, written by soldiers. Many of these tablets have been found around Hadrian's Wall, and also in Vindolanda. Vindolanda, not Vindoluland, because unfortunately it's not a curry house but a Roman fort. The nearest place to get a good Vindaloo would be in Newcastle, though the Romans would know Newcastle as Ponsalius, as it was the Romans that built the city in the 2nd century. Anyway. As for parchment and vellum, scrolls are still around, and they are a tried and tested method, but you also see the pages being made into books. And as the Roman Empire fell, giving way to the early Middle Ages, writing takes a whole new look, because the medieval scribes would be creating magnificent illuminated manuscripts, full of vibrant colours, including many metallic paints.
Oh, bugger. I forgot that unicorn of yours.
Let's take a closer look at a famous book, the Crusader Bible, or the Morgan Bible. It's known by many names, but the Crusader Bible is how I will refer to it. It was created during the 13th century and depicts the Old Testament of the Bible. And you get a sense of how the medieval mind viewed the very ancient history that we've been exploring for the past few thousand years. Well, 20 odd minutes anyway of the vid. These people have no concept of modern archaeology or the true perception of time. They viewed the past through the same lens as their own. This is a David and Goliath, and they are depicted in exactly the same way as you'd expect from a 13th century setting. The Philistine champion is clad in chainmail, complete with greaves and helm, his name etched into his ornate sword. Because as far as the monks in the Middle Ages was concerned, a champion would be a knight, fully belted with honours, much like William Marshall or Ranulph de Blondeville. And all of a sudden, the giant getting slain by a shot from David's sling is all the more miraculous. When Saul gives David the armour, it is also a fully mailed shirt, complete with great helm. Of course, David discards it, as to the story in the Bible. And in case people are wondering, by the way, why David is so short, it's because he's only a young lad, a boy not yet reached his majority. And when David ditches the armour and fights the giant, you get a good insight on how to remove the mail shirt. You practically twerked it off. But they do need to improve on their facial expressions, as David looks completely nonplussed as he casually decapitates Goliath with his own sword. Another point of interest here, in the old Crusader Bible, is we see a glimpse of censorship. Any Christians, or Jews for that matter, you will notice something a bit off here, as this is the part where David presents his victory to Saul. Remember, King Saul wants David dead and effectively sends him on a suicide mission, and now he returns victorious. And King Saul, by the way, is depicted like any other 13th century monarch. But David presents the 200 foreskins from the slain Philistines, as you do. It's a regular Wednesday. But what are these people holding? Heads. Why do that? This is an age where willies and the like are found everywhere in medieval text. It's quite a crass day and age. The people of the 13th century would consider us prudish. No farter at the royal dinner? King Charles. Disgrace.
Oh, he's got no regard for tradition.
So, could these monks be censoring something openly Jewish? Possibly. There was certainly a lot of persecution and anti-Semitism going on. Maybe it is just prudishness. Maybe you could draw as many schlongs as you wanted, but a foreskin was a step too far. And for the final time, it's Sinister, then Dexter. Who knows? But it's interesting. And the Latin text does mention foreskins, the preputia. Although, admittedly, the Latin text was written 100 years later in the 14th century, maybe attitudes have changed. There you go. Maybe it was something as simple as,
Oh, Reggie, how do you draw a foreskin again? Oh, I think I've broken my nib.
all I'm pointing out, in the midst of all this crude humour, is that everything you read is pretty much from the point of view of the author, and occasionally they are not as impartial as they'd like to think. Like in ancient times, the Battle of Kadesh was recorded as a near victory by both opposing sides. So when dealing with history, historians have to be as impartial as humanly possible, and that's a task in itself. Especially when sources often contradict or are fragmentary. All this gives us insight, and as time moves on, we do see the introduction of paper, and it originates in the East. And in the 16th century, we'll see the invention of the humble pencil. And of course you have the printing press, and eventually the typewriter. Just to name a few things. Times have changed since the age of parchment and vellum. When John Hancock put his quill to the US Declaration of Independence, the document was written on paper. A document equally as important as the Magna Carta in the eyes of many. And those good old quills will finally be replaced in the Victorian era by the fountain pen. And it remains that way pretty much until our true modern age, where all kinds of methods crop up, from the Bic pen to the Sharpie. Then, back to the good old stylus. It's used in many of our technologies, especially in digital art. They even have their own version of the tablet, which you write the stylus on. Though they are no longer made of reed, but of plastic. Thank you for watching. I myself, though, I'm using a mouse and a keyboard.
Ooh, using mice as messengers? Outrageous!
So, next time you're in a library or a bookshop, or anywhere you'll find literature, take a moment to think of the history and all the scribes that brought us to this very moment. Thank you for watching.